The hall was quiet, not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the thick, loaded quiet of power, pride, and politics. Inside the grand diplomatic room in Geneva, world leaders gathered for what was supposed to be a routine back-channel discussion. Cameras were off, suits were stiff, smiles were forced. At the far end of the long, polished table sat Captain Ibrahim Traoré, his uniform crisp, his face unreadable. He wasn't here for photo ops, he came to speak for his people. Then, Donald J. Trump entered, flanked by aides, loud, confident, flashing his signature grin. He didn't shake hands with Traoré. Instead, he smirked and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm not wasting time with a nobody." The room froze. A few aides looked down at their notes. A diplomat from South America quietly swallowed. But Traoré didn't move. He didn't blink. His eyes stayed on Trump, not with anger, but with something colder, something deeper. That was the moment the world changed, though no one knew it yet. And when Traoré finally responded, every word hit harder than a missile, but not yet. Because first, he stood up. Traoré didn't shout. He simply rose to his full height, his boots echoing softly against the marble floor. Every movement was deliberate, every breath measured. Trump chuckled awkwardly, but there was a flicker of confusion in his eyes now. He wasn't used to silence fighting back. Traoré looked directly at him. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. "Do you know who I carry with me, Mr. Trump?" The room leaned in. "I carry Sankara, the man your people feared more than your weapons. I carry my ancestors, those who dug gold and bled for nothing. I carry children who drink from muddy wells and mothers who bury sons at 16. A long pause. "You see nobody. I see millions behind me." No one breathed. It wasn't a clapback. It was history speaking through a man in uniform, standing without a country's wealth, but with a continent's pain. A single tear fell from the eye of a diplomat seated near the back, and Trump had nothing to say. It was the first time in years that the world watched him lose his words. But Traoré wasn't done. He walked toward him, slowly. Everyone was watching. But Traoré didn't seem to care. His footsteps were slow, not aggressive, like a teacher walking through a silent classroom, about to drop a truth no one was ready for. He reached the long table, placed his hand on the polished wood, and then he traced his finger along a deep scratch carved into the surface. The room was confused. Then he spoke again. "This table was built from timber stolen from the Congo. This scratch here? It happened during a heated argument, in this same room, over African debt relief. They called it a mark of diplomacy." He paused. "But to me, it's a scar." His voice cracked, but he didn't cry. "You think we are nobody? My people bleed into the soil you build your towers on. And all we ever wanted was respect." Every camera was still off, but phones had started secretly recording. One by one, leaders dropped their pens. Someone whispered, "This will go viral." Trump still hadn't moved. And then Traoré said the line that would break the internet. "But I won't reveal that yet. Not here. Not until Chapter 6. Because some truths need to simmer first." News travels fast. Even when cameras are off, secrets don't stay hidden in rooms filled with power. By the time the meeting hit the 10-minute mark, whispers of the confrontation between Traoré and Trump were already echoing in private chats and encrypted threads. But in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, people weren't whispering. They were watching. A leaked voice memo hit the local airwaves, captured by a security aide who couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed. 1 minute of audio. Traoré's voice unshaken, powerful, raw. Within hours, the markets froze. Buses paused. Radios switched from music to static, replaying the same quote over and over. You see nobody. I see millions behind me. Children looked up from lunch. Mothers stopped stirring their pots. Taxi drivers leaned closer to their dashboards. Africa stood still. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about politics. It was about something older. A wound that had never healed. In those seconds, Traoré didn't just defend himself. He spoke for the buried, the forgotten, the enslaved, the silenced. And across the continent, tears flowed, not out of sadness, but out of long-awaited recognition. But the world hadn't even heard the worst yet. That was coming. Back in Geneva, the room was stiff with shock. No one had dared to move since Traoré's last words. But now, he was standing across from Trump, closer than anyone expected. Trump, arms crossed, tried to appear unfazed. But something had shifted. His usual bravado cracked ever so slightly around the edges. He looked at Traoré like a man suddenly unsure if he'd underestimated something far bigger than he could grasp. Then came the stare. Traoré didn't blink. He didn't frown. He just looked at Trump, like a mountain staring down at a storm, silent, unmoved. And finally, he spoke the line. Not loudly, not aggressively, but with so much weight that it shattered the soul of the room. Men like you built your empires on stolen backs, and still think the throne is yours. I am not a nobody. I am the child of the earth you tried to bury, and now I've grown into the storm you never saw coming. Silence, no coughs, no scribbling, just stunned, aching silence. It wasn't just powerful, it was biblical. Someone in the back whispered, This will be history. But for Traoré, it was just the beginning. Within 24 hours, the leaked clip had 200 million views. By day 3, it had reached half the planet. Someone had combined Traoré's speech with footage of African mothers carrying water, kids studying by candlelight, and drone shots of colonizers taking gold from African soil. The caption? You called him a nobody. Now the world calls him a voice. Celebrities reposted it. Activists wept live on Instagram. School children in Senegal recited his words in classrooms like poetry. Even critics had no choice but to respect what they saw. Traoré's voice had cracked something open, a generational silence. This wasn't about clout. It was about dignity, long denied. But the pressure was rising too. Backstage, some world leaders were furious. Calls were being made. Who leaked this? What damage will this do? And Trump? He was quiet. For once, he didn't tweet. Not because he couldn't, because he knew he lost. But what the world didn't know yet was the real reason Trump had called him a nobody was personal. And that secret? 3 days after the Geneva confrontation, a mysterious envelope appeared on the desk of a high-ranking African diplomat in Paris. No name, no stamps. Just 2 words written across the front in black ink. For him. Inside was a single piece of paper, aged, folded, and signed. The signature, Donald J. Trump. But this wasn't just any letter. It was dated December 2018, long before Traoré became a global name, before he even led Burkina Faso's revolution. The letter was cold, clinical. It spoke about small West African territories, mineral access, and puppets we can manage. But the most chilling line, we don't need strong thinkers from that region. We need silence. If that young army officer Traoré keeps talking, cut him off. He's a nobody. Let him stay that way. The diplomat, heart pounding, took a photo and sent it straight to Traoré. Within minutes, Traoré was alone in his office in Ouagadougou, holding the proof of what he always suspected. He'd been watched, marked, targeted. Not because he was nobody, but because he was too powerful to be allowed to rise. Tears welled in his eyes, and that night, Traoré made a decision that would break the world open. Before the world would know his next move, Traoré did something no one expected. He disappeared. No guards, no convoy, not even a phone. His team panicked, but they trusted him. He returned 2 days later, quietly, carrying nothing but an old black-and-white photo, folded at the edges. He held it during a private televised address that was meant to air only in Burkina Faso, but ended up being streamed globally within the hour. He looked into the camera and held up the picture. "This boy," he said, "was 6 years old when he watched his father dig uranium with no mask, no gloves, and no water." The camera zoomed in. The boy in the picture. Ibrahim Traoré. That boy stood by a dry well and watched French soldiers laugh as they took more. That boy learned silence was death. That boy became me. He paused. "And now I've been called a nobody." He looked directly into the lens, voice trembling. "If I am nobody, then let every African child who suffers without a voice be nobody too." The world didn't just cry, it wept, and the backlash against Trump hadn't even started yet. In Washington, D.C., the fallout came like a tidal wave. What began as a minor diplomatic dust-up had now turned into a global PR disaster. The viral speech, the leaked Trump letter, the photo of 6-year-old Traoré. Even American citizens were protesting outside embassies. CNN aired a special titled, "Nobody, the Man Who Shook the West." Young African Americans were crying on TikTok, stitching videos of Traoré's speech with their own family stories. "We were called nobodies too," one girl whispered, "but now I feel seen." And inside the West Wing, it was chaos. Trump, under mounting pressure from media and international partners, finally broke his silence. He released a 3-line statement. "I do not recall ever writing such a letter. Captain Traoré is free to speak. I have no issue with Burkina Faso." But the damage was done. The world had chosen its hero. And now, children were being named Ibrahim in cities across Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, even Paris. Yet still, Traoré remained silent. Why? Because he was preparing for something far bigger than a speech. He was going to stand somewhere no African leader had stood in decades. A week later, on a cold morning in New York City, a black SUV pulled up to the United Nations headquarters. Security tightened. Journalists flooded the streets. The world wasn't expecting him, but he came anyway. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, in full uniform, stepped out. Not for war, not for revenge, but for something rarer, truth. He had been invited to address a small development roundtable, but when the chair saw him enter, he paused the session. "Captain, would you like to speak to the General Assembly instead?" No African leader had done that in years without written speech or teleprompters. Traoré said yes. And as he stood behind that iconic marble podium, looking out at the flags of the world, he didn't open with greetings or politics. He held up his childhood photograph again. "This is who I speak for." Silence fell. Not for fame, not for followers, but for the children eating once a day while your companies pull billions from our ground. He paused. "I don't want your pity. I want your ears." He gripped the podium. "Because I am not asking for change anymore. I'm declaring it." The hall erupted, some clapping, some stunned. But what came next? No one saw coming. As Traoré exited the UN, reporters and guards formed a tight circle around him. Microphones flashed. Journalists screamed questions in 10 languages. But he wasn't looking at them. He had stopped. Frozen. Because across the street, behind the crowd, stood an old African woman in a worn yellow head wrap. She wasn't part of any delegation. No one had noticed her, except him. She was crying, openly, deeply, and in her trembling hand. She held a letter. Traoré crossed the street himself. Security panicked. Aides tried to stop him, but he waved them off. He knelt beside her, gently took her hand. "Why are you crying, Mama?" he asked in soft French. Her reply broke everyone. "I lost my son to illegal mining. He died in a shaft you spoke of. No one ever said his name on a stage. But you carried him today." She handed him the letter. Her son's name was Malik, 17 years old. Traoré held it to his chest, tears filling his eyes. The world captured the moment. A revolutionary leader kneeling in the snow beside a broken mother, crying for someone he never met. And in that moment, he didn't look like a president. He looked like a son of the soil. 2 days later, Traoré did something never done before by an African head of state. He asked to visit Arlington National Cemetery, not to honor American soldiers, but to bury Malik's letter. With the mother's blessing, he chose a tree near the edge of the cemetery, far from the headlines, away from the monuments. With his own hands, he dug a small hole and placed the letter inside. He covered it with earth. Then he whispered, "You were never a nobody. Now you rest where they can never ignore you again." The press was kept away. No speeches, just a private moment of quiet grief and quiet defiance. But someone had recorded it from afar, a groundskeeper. The video titled, "Traoré Buries a Son He Never Knew." It went viral in less than an hour. And this time, even the White House posted it, with one word, respect. But Traoré wasn't done. He had one final speech to give, his most important one. And it wouldn't be in a government building. It would be somewhere the world had long forgotten. No press knew where he was going. No ministers were invited. Captain Ibrahim Traoré boarded a small private boat off the coast of Senegal. Only one place in Africa held the kind of silence he now sought, Gorée Island, the last place millions of Africans saw before being shipped away in chains. The sun was low as the boat pulled in. Waves crashed gently. The house of slaves stood still, its walls older than memory, its floors soaked in ghosts. Traoré stepped in alone. And what he did next broke every heart that watched. He removed his beret, he fell to his knees, and he whispered, "To all of you who were stolen, to the mothers who never saw their children again, to the men who died nameless in cold oceans, I carry you. I speak because you were not allowed to." He pressed his forehead against the stone wall, his shoulders trembling. Outside, the ocean roared softly like a broken lullaby. And far away, on a phone held by one security guard in tears, the moment was streamed live to the world. No music, no words, just the sound of a leader mourning history itself. The world watched in stunned silence. This wasn't politics anymore. It was something deeper, something spiritual. But then, as Traoré stepped out of the slave house onto the stone path leading to the ocean's edge, he collapsed. Aid rushed forward. Guards panicked. Cameras shook as the live feed captured the image. Burkina Faso's strongest son, lying face down on the ground, unmoving. At first, the world feared the worst. Was he attacked? Was it staged? But within minutes, his office released a simple, heartbreaking statement. Captain Traoré fainted due to exhaustion, dehydration, and emotional strain. He has been carrying the grief of generations. He simply needed to fall, so others could rise. People around the globe began lighting candles. Mosques and churches alike prayed for him. Strangers wept. African youth recorded voice notes. "You're not alone, Ibrahim. Please get up. We need you." Even some American veterans posted messages. "We fought with less courage than this man just showed." That night, hashtags took over. Get up, Traoré. You carry us all, from nobody to nation. But no one knew when or if he would wake up, until the morning after. The sun had just risen in Ouagadougou. The sky was soft gold, and then A notification lit up across phones worldwide. Live, message from Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The screen faded in. He was sitting beneath a baobab tree, wrapped in a simple cloth. Not his uniform, no medals, no stage. Just him, barefoot, with wind in his hair and soil in his hands. And then he spoke. Yesterday, I fell. Not because I am weak, but because we've all been carrying too much. The pain of our parents, the silence of our leaders, the fear that we don't matter. He took a deep breath. But I woke up today because of you. The mother in New York, the miner's son in Ghana, the student in Lagos, the protester in D.C. His voice shook. They called me a nobody, but I've never felt more surrounded, more carried, more alive. He pressed his hand into the dirt. I'm still here, and I will never, ever stop. The video ended, and in every corner of the earth, people were already crying. But Traoré had one final move left, and it would shake even the skeptics. One by one, they came down. At embassies across Africa, old colonial flags that had quietly flown side by side with national ones were lowered. Not by decree, not by protest, but by ordinary people. In Malawi, it was a young teacher. In Cameroon, a market woman and her children. In Burkina Faso, it was schoolboys in dusty uniforms, singing the national anthem as they folded the last French flag with trembling hands. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't revenge. It was a moment of healing, a silent revolution, inspired not by violence, but by a single man who was brave enough to fall, cry, and rise again. Traoré became a symbol, not of power, but of pain transformed into purpose. Universities renamed lecture halls. Artists painted murals of him weeping beneath the baobab. A girl in Côte d'Ivoire wrote a poem titled, "To the Nobody Who Made Us All Somebody." Even in Paris, something unthinkable happened. A group of French students laid roses at their African Studies department with a note, "Forgive what our fathers never said sorry for." The world was changing, and the world knew who started it. Traoré could have stayed in Geneva, or Washington, or anywhere the world now celebrated him. But he chose somewhere else. He went home. Not to the palace, not to the capital, but to the dusty village where he was born. There, under the same mango tree where he once studied by candlelight, Traoré sat with elders, barefoot again, eating millet and laughing softly. And then a boy, maybe 7 years old, walked up to him. He was holding a drawing, a picture of Traoré, with a red heart drawn over his chest. "My papa says you made us proud," the boy whispered. "Are you a king?" Traoré bent down and smiled. "No," he said. "I'm just someone who listened when the ground cried." The boy nodded. "I want to be like you." Traoré placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then never call yourself a nobody. Ever." That clip, unscripted, gentle, raw, was captured by a traveling filmmaker. And that's the video that became the most shared moment in African social media history. Not the speeches, not the fall, but that whisper under a mango tree. And now, it was time to say goodbye. The final video opens with soft music. Clips roll. Traoré in Geneva, in the slave house, crying with the mother, holding the child, collapsing under the sun. And then it fades into his face. One last message. If you've ever been made to feel like nothing, if you've ever been laughed at for your accent, your skin, your story, if they ever said you're just from Africa, remember this. Even shadows disappear when you step into the sun. I was called a nobody, and I became a voice for millions. He looks into the camera, eyes kind, voice steady. Now it's your turn. Speak, rise, heal. He raises a fist, not in anger, but in hope. The screen fades to black. If this story moved you, don't scroll away. Like to lift your voice. Subscribe to walk the journey with us. Comment, "I am somebody" below, so Traoré knows he did not speak in vain.